Game night is rapidly approaching, and you, as the forever GM, are at a loss for what comes next with your players and your fantasy role playing game campaign. You need to buy some time until that next great wave of inspiration hits, and you might consider to drop in a quick dungeon for your player characters to explore to buy you that time. And you will find 16 of those drop in sort of dungeons in Dungeons Deep from Kobold Press. And I will share my review right after this. Happy New Year, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Before I dive into today's review, I do want to mention if you enjoy the Gaming Gang and would like to support the outlet, you can do so in a few ways. First, by utilizing our affiliate links to the One Bookshelf sites, such as DriveThruRPG, and to do so, simply visit thegaminggang.com, click on one of our banners. That way, if you happen to make a purchase, I get a small portion of that sale. You can also make a one-time donation by way of PayPal or become a monthly member of our Patreon. You'll find links in the show notes. Also, down in those show notes, you're going to find an invite link to our Discord server. It's absolutely free to sign up, so be sure to hang with the gang on Discord. The Gaming Gang 12 Days of Reviews wraps up with my review of Dungeons Deep from Kobold Press. This 176-page hardcover carries an MSRP of $39.99. If you want to grab just the PDF alone, you can do so over at DriveThruRPG for $19.99. Having said that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Dungeons Deep from Kobold Press. Three things I want to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Kobold Press were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's actually important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a good feel for what you're going to find inside. And then lastly, this is a volume that's comprised of 16 different dungeons. So if you're a player and your GM/DM has already picked this up, maybe they just haven't started running anything from it yet. Maybe they're talking about picking this up. Keep in mind, even though I'll stay relatively spoiler-free, you are going to see some things as I flip on through this that are going to ruin some of the surprises of these dungeons. So I'm warning you in advance. Now, of course, if your GM/DM, and that'll be the last time I use that term, is considering picking up Dungeons Deep, let them know about this review. That way they can approach this and make a far more informed buying decision. First thing we're going to do is take a peek at the credits page. A lot of folks work very hard to bring this to life. Let's give credit where credit is due. As I mentioned, this volume is comprised of 16 quick dungeons, and this is for Dungeons and Dragons, obviously enough. It's also for Tales of the Valiant, which is Kobold Press's home system of fantasy role-playing adventure. Really, you can use this with any 5e adjacent RPG as well. So each of these dungeons will share some common characteristics in its layout. So first of all, we're going to find out what is the theming of the dungeon. So the first dungeon we have, it's goblinoids. We've got oozes. We've got urban adversaries. So we've got a wide selection of different sorts of buckets of adversaries that the player characters are going to face. We'll also have a detailed map, Some of them are pretty large scale, considering these are just drop-in dungeons. Others are pretty tight. So just a handful of locations for the player characters to explore. Once again, these are designed to drop into your campaign. I could see a few of these easily being utilized as one-shots. I think there's enough in some of these which would allow for that. Others, I don't think really lend themselves all that well to just being used as quick one-shots without a little more fleshing out. Giving the characters a little more background, a little more setting information, because some of these, the introduction of background about these dungeons is pretty sparse. So each dungeon will get a quick blurb, which will tell you what you'll find there. So one is a slime pit. So it's the home of oozes. Something I found very interesting here is you will not be looking at a bunch of stat blocks for the various different creatures and monsters and such, because the way this is presented is in 3 different level tiers. So each of the dungeons in areas that will have some sort of adversary or challenge, it'll show, okay, if your player characters are levels 1 through 4, populate with this. So as an example, if it's like the goblinoid dungeon, you're looking at, well, goblins. But if you're looking at maybe using that for characters who are levels 5 through 8, instead of goblins, you're going to use bugbears. So I thought that's a nice little addition, a nice little twist to the way these are presented, because a lot of times with various different adventure compendiums from Kobold Press and other publishers as well, you'll see, oh, okay, this adventure is for levels 1 or levels 1 and 2 or levels 4 and so forth. And if your player characters aren't those levels, you're probably not going to be utilizing those adventures without at least tweaking them quite a bit with the various different challenges your players are going to face. So I do like the fact that we have the variety of adversaries for you to utilize. Now, having said that, that does make each of these dungeons feel a little bit more par for the course. I don't want to say generic, but they don't stand out as well as some adventures from Kobold Press tend to do. Now, this is something I mentioned when I was sharing my favorite role-playing games that I reviewed in 2025. I think when Kobold Press leans heavily into their Midgard setting with their adventures and their supplements, I think they really stand out because Midgard is such a cool, epic fantasy setting. When Kobold Press kind of steers towards more of a book standard sort of 5e D&D adventure, I think they suffer a little bit. And the way these drop-in dungeons are presented, I mean, they could be anywhere, which is fine. I do understand the philosophy of that. But in my opinion, if you skew towards your own home setting, I'd rather see that, especially if it's a really cool setting like Midgard. And then if game masters don't want to utilize that, they can just ignore it, as opposed to having to sit there and just look at something where it's like, well, you know, this could easily be for Tales of the Valiant or Dungeons and Dragons or advanced 5e. So I think these being setting agnostic kind of works against them. And yes, I do understand we had the 2 Labyrinth books from Kobold Press, which opens up their version of the multiverse. But the reality is, I had the impression that the Labyrinth was designed more for players and game masters to travel between Midgard and other settings, especially those from Wizards of the Coast. It's kind of the feeling I got. Although I did like the Labyrinth books quite a bit. One of them, actually, the World book, made it into my favorite RPG releases I reviewed last year. But still, I kind of got the impression that part of the design philosophy for that was to help game masters for 5e D&D utilize Kobold Press stuff, and of course, players who are utilizing Tales of the Valiant to use the 5e Wizards of the Coast or even third-party content too. So each of the dungeons will get a topography section that's going to tell us about how how high the ceilings are, what kind of lighting do we have, what kind of environmental ambiance is there. I will say that I do appreciate the fact that we have a variety of different sorts of dungeons. They're not all dungeons per se. Some of them are dungeons. Some of them, have like a mausoleum or a cave system or the basement of a building and so on and so forth. So I like how we've got a nice variety. We have a cool variety of various different adversaries that the player characters are going to take on as well. So I definitely like that quite a bit. Once again, no stat blocks, no like standout NPCs or anything like that, because these are designed to just drop right on into your campaign without having to invest a whole hell of a lot of prep time. Now, of course, you're going to want to read through these, but you're not going to have to do a whole lot of studying and thinking about, oh, well, what are the motivations of these important NPCs? Now, this is kind of Monty Hallism at its finest. Here's one of those big layout sort of dungeons here. This is one that I would think you could pull off as a one-shot, even maybe something for a couple of sessions. So this is a bit meatier than some of the other tales that are in here as well. But as an example, talking about the blurb, Quilton's Sanctuary, an eccentric sage's lair filled with bizarre pets. So we get the intro, we get the layout, talking about visuals, talking about sounds. We really don't see a bunch of topography because we're actually looking at a ground floor and then like a finished basement area, finished dungeon area. Just giving you a peek throughout here. And then we will wrap up with some advertisements for Tales of the Valiant, which I really like. And then the aforementioned 2 volumes in the Labyrinth release. All right, so that is a peek inside Dungeons Deep for Tales of the Valiant and Dungeons and Dragons and other 5e adjacent fantasy role-playing games. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. So let's start off with production quality. It's what we've come to expect from Kobold Press. Artwork throughout. I'm a fan of Kobold Press's art, and I love how the artwork is normally pretty uniform throughout their books. So there isn't something that suddenly you're reading through and it's jarring and you're like, who signed off on that piece of artwork? No, you never encounter that with Kobold Press. As far as the paper stock, it is a little bit lighter than some other publishers that I review releases from. I would say it's on the scale of the Dungeons and Dragons 2024 paper stock from the Wizards of the Coast books. It's thicker than what we used to see in the old 5e releases that would come out. This also has a stitch binding, so that goes a long way to keeping the book together with repeated use at your game table. I like the fact that we've got 3 different tiers in which to populate these various different dungeons, and that also allows for a game master to maybe reappropriate some of these later on down the line, especially if you're running a years-long campaign. Players don't remember maps and things like that. They remember the monsters that they fight and so on. Now, where I think this would really stand out would be for a virtual tabletop. And as of right now, I do not believe that Dungeons Deep is available for any tabletop out there, be it Foundry, Fantasy Grounds, Roll20, or anything else. Now, I do know you can get the map pack in, I'm going to guess, high definition JPEGs but that's going to run you $19.99. Now, I should also throw in the fact that because there are no specific like Tales of the Valiant monsters or like named NPCs and things like that, all you need to do in order to use this on a virtual tabletop would be import the maps, key those maps, and then simply sit there and drag over the various different adversaries from your monster manual or monster vault, what have you. I'm not saying that it's simple to do this. I'm just saying it's easier than having to homebrew everything from scratch. But I think that's where this would really stand out as far as just dropping them into an ongoing VTT campaign. I do like this book. I do recommend this book. I do feel that the dungeons themselves are solid, just simply not spectacular. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Dungeons Deep from Kobold Press a 7 out of 10. All right, that is it for this time out. If you liked the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also let you know when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Should point out, my holiday break is about to end. I will be back soon. It'll be January 6th at 7 p.m. when the Dispatch returns. So I hope everybody's enjoyed the Gaming Gang 12 days of reviews, and I hope everyone's having a fantastic new year as well. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.